Hey everyone! I was sitting here procrastinating, and then I decided I might as well procrastinate with you. And I guess what I was getting stuck on is I want to write a whole bunch of different things about topics that you've told me and asked me questions about and told me that you want to hear more about. And I just can't decide what topics. So help me decide on what we should talk about next. And if you have any questions, I'm going to be on here for the next little while, so you can ask things as well. But I also one of the things that I'm writing about that I want to share with you, and I want to give you more tips and classes and skills on, is sensual sex. So sensuality and engaging our senses more in our erotic kind of capabilities and the way that we go about relating to other people. And I think sensuality gets a bad rap. I think that sensuality a lot of times is seen as, relegated to kind of just romance or femininity or soft sex or romantic sex or, my phone's going to die, or sex that has particular aesthetics to it, right? And so we see a lot of sensuality in like romance movies, but we don't necessarily see sensuality as a key component of like mainstream porn. Right? So, and we'll talk about what it means when you're talking about sensuality and what that kind of involves. Alternate hypothesis, hey, says, oh man, I'd love to hear the sensual conversation targeted to men. I would love to too, but I have to say that my sensual sex classes are often filled with women, and so maybe bringing it to different platforms allows more men to be engaged. And I think you raise a really good point. I think that a lot of what we teach as masculinity and as masculine characteristics actually creates a barrier for men or masculine identifying people to engage in more sensual behavior. We sort of like paint sensuality as feminine and therefore, not really something that is accessible or acceptable for masculine people. So you're right. It's definitely a challenge to kind of rewrite that narrative for masculine people. Hey, Karen. And, Hassan, you're having a great time by yourself over there, so keep it up. But when we're talking about sensuality, it really isn't something that's gendered. It isn't even really something that is painted with the broad strokes of romance or softness or tenderness that we attach to it kind of due to pop culture and due to the way that we look at sex versus, or like naughty sex versus more appropriate or acceptable sex, and in what those conditions would be like. So for example, sensual sex we think can't happen during a hookup, and we think it has to happen in a confine where there's also love or romance or tenderness or care or something like that. So we describe all these different kinds of situations as being appropriate or not appropriate for sensuality. But the reality is you always have your five senses. You have them available to you whether you're with someone for one night or 1,000 nights, and engaging your sensuality and your senses actually just makes more sense if you want to have better sex, right? If you want to have sex that feels great on many different levels, then you got to have sex with more than your genitals, right? And so if there's another way for you to get turned on, why wouldn't we want to facilitate that for our partners and for ourselves? And so really thinking about how sensual sex has kind of been written into our own personal narratives around how we understand what sex and intimacy is and where we think certain types of sex and intimacy are more appropriate than other types. And so when we're thinking about sensuality, you're thinking about your five senses as these little like potential portals of pleasure that you get to excite and delight. And so you get to have this infinite capacity for thinking about sexual creativity and curiosity if you tap into your senses. And so a lot of us, we're driven to believe that it's only sort of our visual sense that is the most dominant sense. So when we think about porn and just just looking at a particular sexual image, is that enough for you to get turned on? And it may be great, but what if, having that aesthetic extended beyond, and maybe you really like the sounds of sex, maybe you like the taste of sex, maybe you like the scent of sex, and drop me a heart or that little huggy emoji if you're someone who's really into touch, if you're someone who can't get enough of cuddles or scratches or fingertips or skin to skin kind of stuff. I'm totally a touch slut, and I think that it's a huge part of building arousal to figure out which senses are most ripe in that particular situation. And situations can differ, and they can differ from person to person. They can differ from day to day, depending on what you're feeling and where your erotic mind is at, and the ways that you decide to stimulate your partners. And so especially for if you're looking to do something a bit new with a partner that you've had for a long time, or if you're completely new to a partner, thanks, Karen, another touch slut. If you're new to a partner, sensual sex is a great way to discover what is it that is going to stimulate this person's particular desires or needs in this moment. And so if I'm super stressed out, maybe like going for the gold and going straight for my genitals isn't really gonna help my mind catch up to where maybe my desire is at that point. And so you may want to tap into something that's a bit more visually seductive, or maybe you want to dirty talk and appeal to my sense of sound and really like engage me in your words or your tone or your intention behind those words. So sensual sex just opens up more possibilities for us to discover all the different layers that help us give pleasure to people and also receive pleasure. So for example, in a position where you might be primarily doing the giving, so let's say you're giving oral sex, you may be focused on their pleasure that's coming from the stimulation of your mouth to their genitals. But there's also so much more to take in that moment. So as the giver, you could totally like listen to the change in their breath or the way that their voice moves or what they're saying or how they're moaning. And that can become a point of pleasure for you as well, for you to be getting off on the sensations that you're helping them create. And so you're just adding to your pleasure. Maybe you're already having a great time with your face in their crotch and you're like, damn, their moans sound so hot, or, oh, I'm feeling myself rubbing against their leg, or, oh, I love how their hands are tangled in my hair, or whatever it is, or looking up and making eye contact. Who likes eye fucking? Who's into eye contact? Drop me a little eyeball if you're into eye contact. That's another one that we often think of as like creating a deeper sense of sensuality, because it's very vulnerable. It's vulnerable to sort of see someone take you in these erotic, sexy moments. And so sometimes we reserve that vulnerability for particular kinds of situations or sex where we feel that we're going to be safe, we're going to be respected, we're going to be trusted. But it's also possible to create those conditions by having conversations about, well, what do you need to feel safe and, feel like your freest, most naughtiest self? Like, that's a great conversation to have as verbal foreplay for a hookup. What can I do to help you feel free and safe in this moment? Awesome, Syed, you left eyes. Awesome. Karen left eyes too. All the eyes are for eye fucking. So if you're into eye fucking, drop me some little eyeballs there. But being able to say, even if someone isn't inviting that conversation, if they're not asking you what would be good for you, whether they're your first-time partner or a long-time partner, you can kind of say, hey, I feel free to tell me what does it for you. Like, I'd love to hear how your dirty little mind works. And, if I'm on dating apps, one of the things I'll start to say as the conversation gets more sexual, like, I want to lay it out. I'm not wasting my time. If you're not sensual, I'm not interested. And so I kind of say, oh, like, what are you into? And because I'm really into affection, open-minded talks, and lots of making out. And so then they'll say, oh yeah, I like all that too, and I like anal, or whatever they're into. And so kind of like putting it out there that affection is one way of engaging your sensuality and your senses, but affection is a term that people can relate to and kind of say like, oh, that implies I like hugs and kisses, and maybe, oh, you're into affection too, what does that look like for you? So having these discussions don't have to feel very clinical, they don't have to feel like an interview, even though for me they totally are, but they can totally feel like, hey, I'm just trying to learn about you and like have a sexy conversation. And sexy communication comes across as so confident. If you're able to have these discussions and feel kind of playful and, like you're owning it and really comfortable with it, then you give off also an air of empowerment. And so what your yeses are, what your nos are, you're able to also respect that from someone else. And it just gives you more information through the engagement of sensuality about what's good for another person. What's good for my body may not be what's good for your body, or what's good for the body that I had before you or after you. And so everyone is different in every different occasion. So we can only kind of start with the information that's given to us and then create an environment where we can continue to have communication so that you're having the best time possible, right? Everyone's feeling like their needs are being met and that they're able to also even experiment more. So when people feel safer and like they're going to be listened to, it's easier to talk about things like fantasies or kink, or, oh, I'd love this a little bit harder or deeper, or, hey, have you ever thought about trying this? Feel free to leave me any questions if there's something that you want to ask me about sensuality or about any of the other wonderful, fun things I get to teach. But the reason I wanted to talk about sensual sex is because I think it gets a little bit of a reputation for being something that not everybody has access to, or that people kind of like save up for a special moment. And the thing with sensual sex is that there's also a continuum of it. So the way that you maybe I fuck someone that you're really excited because it's like a one-night stand or it's your first time together can be different maybe than the way you choose to put a different intention behind I fucking for someone you've fallen in love with, or someone that you've shared intimate feelings with, or someone that you're emotionally invested in. So the senses themselves, or engaging in sensuality, doesn't necessarily say anything about the dynamic other than you're getting curious about more ways to get turned on and more ways to input arousals into the different senses that are available. So we talked about a little bit about touch. We talked about sound. So we talked about listening. And some eye fucking. So then there's also tasting and scent. And one of the big things about taste is that you can often find that even the receiver, people have a lot of shame around what their body tastes like. And so we've been told that, our bodies, especially people with vulvas, they're supposed to taste like lavender and like roses and bullshit. And we taste like bodies, right? We taste like our chemicals that are coming through our skin. We taste like our sweat. We taste like, juices. Oh, sorry about that. We taste like so many different types of body chemicals that are being kind of pushed out of us, but also in the sexual sense. So we've got lots of pheromones and we've got lots of fluids. So when we're thinking about even inviting someone to talk to us about like what they like, you can say, oh, I love how, sweat tastes, or I'm really curious about what your juices taste like, or your cum tastes like. And sometimes that can add a layer of reassurance for people. It can add this affirmation that, whatever your body is doing is okay with me. Likewise, if you have a boundary around a fluid, that's also a good time to say, oh, I love like spit. I love sweat, but I'm not that into juices. I'd rather wear them instead of taste them, or something like that. And so it makes it really clear without anyone feeling shamed, because our bodies are not unhygienic. They're not, naturally supposed to smell scented. And so there's a lot of shame that we have to unlearn, both as givers and receivers. Okay, I think there is a question. Brittany says, oh, everyone has a different taste, and And so I love it. Yeah, me too. I think it's great. I think it's more of them. It feels like really unique to their bodies. So we had someone ask, what is sensual sex? So when we're talking about sensual sex, it's about engaging all of your different senses. So you're kind of doing a scan of like, what are the different ways that I could possibly either engage with, so that's either in giving or receiving something from your sex or sort of your senses. I don't know why Hassan is trying to pick up in the middle of me talking about sensual sex, but you know what? I just got distracted for a moment. Anyways, so when we're talking about sensual sex, you want to think about kind of like even making a list. So I often do this in my group workshops. So we'll make a list about, what the different senses are and the different ways that you could potentially stimulate them. So you could, let's say we put down sight. And so you may write down, we could stimulate sight by like gazing into each other's eyes. We could stimulate sight by dressing up for each other. We could stimulate sight by watching porn together. We could stimulate sight by having sex in front of the mirror. So think about the different ways that you can go through each of the senses and just pick out like, how can I delight and excite this particular sense? The last sense that I'm going to talk about is scent. And so scent is similar to taste, where we have a lot of shame around the ways that our bodies smell. So armpits, sweat, under boob, in the folds, in the genitals, in the butt crack, between the toes. There's so many places where people like to have sexual and erotic play but then we're worried that, oh my God, do I smell like cheese? Like, what do I smell like? But for lots of people, scent is definitely a place where you, can really taste, take in more of that person. And scent can also vary. So scent can go from sort of a mild body odor or a mild muskiness into something that's a bit riper and that's more pungent. And so there's no shame in liking something on that continuum or nothing on that continuum. And so for sex, and a lot of times we think that our own bodies smell worse or are going to be automatically offensive to other people. And so it can be hard to kind of then relax into receiving someone trying to smell us and love us up. So it'd be great if we can work towards, as part of our body and sexual confidence, is just sort of getting neutral around scents and destigmatizing them, so then you can actually discover do you like this or do you not like this. I love armpits. I think sweaty armpits are so hot, so sexy, hairy, not hairy, don't care. I think that there's something so erotic and arousing about someone's sweat, particularly from that area. And so for some people, even just being able to talk about that and being like, oh, I would love to do this for you. How would you feel about this? Or what do you think about body odors or body sweat? It's another way to help us be a little bit less barriered to the possibilities of, someone liking something that we have decided is shameful or gross on our bodies when, maybe that's messaging that no longer serves us. So yeah, I hope you get to do some of this sensual exploration, even if it's thinking about if you're not partnered right now or you are partnered and you want to talk to your partner about it, just having a discovery around how sensual sex can actually play out for what you already like to do. So if you already like to have oral sex, how can you make it more sensual? Sensual sex also tends to help us slow things down and come back into our bodies and be a little bit more mindful. And that mindfulness can allow us to open up to even deeper, bigger, better orgasms, better connection, more communication, more adventure, more fantasy. And so it can spice up our sex lives without doing anything, super crazy, right? So I hope you enjoyed talking about senses and sensual sex with me. And my newsletter comes out on Thursday, so I've got some tips in there actually for getting better at getting pleasure from giving. So being a good giver so that you can also be a really good receiver. So if you're not signed up, head over to my link in my bio and you can sign up from there. And if you ever have questions about what topics I'm putting out, definitely like drop me a line and let me know. Or if you're interested in online coaching, you also know where to find me. So go explore your senses, go make that little list, get filthy with all of your senses, and I will see you next time. Bye, Brittany. Bye, Brittany Lynn. Bye. More lives. Yes, I agree. I want to do more lives too. Thanks, alternate hypothesis. Hey, Capo143. Yay, me too. And Karen, I don't know if, yeah, Karen, you're there. Okay, thanks for the love, Karen. And I think it was Maddie, Miku, and Hassan. I guess you look like you had a good time. All right, bye, everyone.